The Bank of Canada has lowered its key interest rate by half a percentage point to 3.25%. Forecasters had been expecting the interest rate cut today after the November labor force survey showed the unemployment rate rose to 6.8%. But the central bank has signaled a slower pace of rate cuts moving forward as it focuses on keeping inflation at its 2% target. We spoke with Dr. Moshe Lander, economist and professor at Concordia University, to discuss the last interest rate announcement of 2024.
Up until last week, I think it was maybe a coin flip whether the Bank of Canada was going to go with the 25 basis point or the 50 basis point cut. Given the labor market numbers that we saw and the suggestion that the economy might actually be in a recession, 50 basis points became almost the inevitable decision today. So I don't know that there's much surprise, financial markets or otherwise. I'm still not convinced it was the right thing to do. 25 basis points would have been fine by me, and we could have done further cuts into 2025. I don't know if they're necessarily using up all of their best ammunition now, and they're not going to have much to go in 2025. And there's a lot of worrying signs coming for next year that might need some of those interest rate cuts. So front loading it now might mean that they don't have that capacity in a few months' time.
The cut also has serious implications for Canada's inflation fight and the weakness of the Canadian dollar.
So we've already seen that the Canadian dollar is touching down around 70 cents. It could easily tip into the high 60s, but that 1 cent movement here or there isn't the real issue. The monetary policy of the Bank of Canada and the Fed have diverged. We don't have to move in lockstep with each other, but we do have this history of moving relatively close to each other. When we diverge like this, there's not going to be as much demand for Canadian dollars because the Canadian investments aren't quite as attractive as US investments. When there's not demand for anything, whether we're talking about iPads, Taylor Swift tickets, or Canadian dollars, the price of those things falls. And so the Canadian dollar has been falling. That's the biggest factor behind it. Throw in that our economy is a little bit weaker, there's a stronger, we're facing tariffs in a month that are going to be imposed by them. Even if we retaliated with tariffs, they're not going to have the same impact. Our economy is not looking very strong in a variety of ways. And so that falling Canadian dollar then is the inevitable consequence. The good news in Canada, we like to tell ourselves, is that a weak Canadian dollar means it's good for exports, which is true. But it is another source of demand in the economy. Beyond our own consumers, businesses, and governments, there's now more foreigners lining up to buy our stuff. And when there's more demand, if supply can't meet it, that's a source of inflation. And for any Canadian who's looking at heading to the US, when the Canadian dollar is weak, that means that those goods and services that you're buying in the US, when converted back into Canadian dollars, is even more expensive than it was. So that too becomes another source of inflation. So when we have a little bit of inflation to give, we're at 2%. We could go up all the way to 3% before it becomes a problem. But given the scars that we have from 2022 and 2023, the last thing that we want to see is that inflation starts to creep up again and potentially put a pause on future Bank of Canada cuts because they're worried about inflation rearing itself again.